members of the Permanent Forum. Now this may not sound like a big deal, but it is a very bold step for governments to allow themselves to be interviewed almost by civil society as to what is going on in their countries, and they did a very good job, and they issued their own reports, and it is a step in the right direction as to the international community addressing a very serious situation, and hopefully that will see itself happen throughout the world. Brody?
Yes, just to add to that, as a perfect example, I think Tony mentioned that basically after the forum members made this visit to Bolivia, they made a ton of dozens of recommendations to both of these governments, and these governments are acting upon those recommendations right now. They were on all kinds of different changes that were necessary to legislation, that it was important to improve. I know some of the, I didn't go there actually, so I don't know, I can't remember all the recommendations they made, but there were institutional changes that had to be made. For example, there was an ombudsman's, there are ombudsmen actually there, and those positions in both countries, and they have been strengthened since that visit. So a number of real changes have actually been made since then. Another example is a few years back, the forum raised its concerns about palm oil plantations. What's happening, with this increasing emphasis on biofuel, and what happened is it's an example of globalization as well, with the subsidies that go here into biofuel production here in the U.S. that actually raises the price of biofuel, and then that acts as an incentive for. This was happening in the Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia as an incentive for them basically to cut down forests where indigenous peoples were living and to set up palm plantations instead for the extraction of palm oil, which would then go into biofuel production. And all in the name of actually a green economy, because biofuel is supposedly so good. So they're destroying forests, dislocating people who were living in those forests so they could produce biofuel. Obviously, any sane person could see that this is not a sustainable way of doing things. And the forum actually raised a lot of fuss about this, and that had an effect. So actually now the World Bank has changed their policies, and they're no longer funding practices like this. And literally they changed the policy and the way they work. So yes, the UN works slow, and the recommendations that the forum makes, it takes a while often for them to be implemented. But it does happen, even though it's not everything we want, and it's not happening as fast as we want it, but it does work sometimes.
My question was about what is, or if anything is being done to impart knowledge from the indigenous community to other communities, because I feel like in terms of making sure that people are really respecting the needs of the indigenous population, they have to understand that they do have value, and the way that they live, and the fact that they do have knowledge that other communities do not have. I'm just wondering, is there any kind of cross knowledge, because I see them learning things from other communities, but us not really getting anything from them.
It's a book, a document that was issued quite recently by the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum, and the name of that book is The State of the World's Indigenous Peoples. It's an excellent, excellent reference book, and oh good, you have one. Oh good, and Brody brought a few copies. And it's very much an up-to-date summary, region-wise, of indigenous peoples worldwide, not only North America, but all over the world, as to what is happening policy-wise, statistic-wise, health, development, all of the 6 areas that the Permanent Forum looks into and is responsible for, as you heard in the documentary earlier, which is human rights, economic, social development, education, culture, what am I well,
It was mentioned all, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was mentioned in the film as well, but yeah.
yes.
I always, when I do this, I always forget one.
Y-
So,
yeah.
health, education,
Health, I think.
development, human rights, culture, and what's the last one I'm forgetting? No. No.
No, we have to. No.
Environment.
Environment. So you can contact the Permanent Forum Secretariat for copies of this book, and correct. Oh, it is online. I'm sorry. That's right. It is online at our website. So that is one, and you're right. If I could be so bold as to say that I really think that the indigenous movement that has been going on within the United States and Canada for all these decades has had a great deal of influence on the African American community in terms of the movement for in terms of their movement into the international world as far as human rights and reconciliation. I really believe, and I know in many cases, the African American community and has looked to how indigenous peoples moved within those sectors and replicated part of our work, which I think we're very proud of.
Northeastern Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And one of the problems that they're having is keeping up with economic development. And they're finding that as big corporations move in and encourage people to produce cash crops, local farmers that only have small plots of land can't compete with these big corporations. But big corporations are able to offer cheaper goods than small farmers. So what is being done to rectify situations like this?
First of all, let me say that particular situation is not something that just happens to indigenous communities. It happens throughout the world. Small farmers cannot compete with agribusiness. Just can't do it. So how do you handle it? What do governments do to deflect or deal with that situation? And how does the Indigenous Forum, the Permanent Forum, deal with that particular issue? It comes to our attention, and through recommendations and through reports. And it's something such as what Brody just mentioned in terms of replacing sustainable products sustainable products with something like something to develop palm oil, for instance. And the Permanent Forum using its influence to work with, let's say, the World Bank, because the World Bank is going to invest in governments to develop crops or to develop agricultural businesses in their countries. So it's the political will, very much so, of governments that you have to go after. So you have to bring that particular issue to a forum such as an international forum like the Permanent Forum, and then have the issue made public and brought out. But it's a difficult one, and we're familiar with it. It happens in indigenous communities all over the world, in Africa, in North America, Southeast Asia in particular, especially communities that are small and isolated.
Okay,
there was
just
yeah,
one thing.
sure.
Just briefly, it's important also to not to have too high expectations of what the UN can do. Let's remember that the UN is it's an organization of member states, of governments, and one of the key things that is so important to these governments